welcome back to another YouTube video. Now, today's video, guys, it is finally time. After a year, we do this every year as kind of a tradition. It is finally time to re-rank the Diary of a Wimpy Kid books from the worst to the best. But first, of course, I do have some announcements to make. So I'm all suited up. I obviously have the Diary of a Wimpy Kid hat that I got from when I bought The Meltdown. And also the new book, Big Shot. If you bought this at, I believe, Barnes & Noble's, you would get the Big Shot bags. That's a pretty cool collectible that I have. But this ranking will consist of all of the Diary of a Wimpy Kid books as well as the Rowley Jefferson journals, but it will not be including the movie diaries. I don't like to include those just because they feel like a separate series, it feels like. And I get Rowley Jefferson journals are spin-offs, but they still do feel similar to the Diary of a Wimpy Kid books, so I feel that it is okay to include them in this ranking. But as far as the movie diaries go, I feel like they are just a separate, a completely separate miscellaneous series. But I do have both of the movie diaries. We have the first movie diary, which is the original trilogy, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Roderick Rules, and Dog Days. And then I have the next chapter, which was for the Long Haul movie. And now that I think about it, I probably should re-rank the movies as well. We'll see how that goes. But I know you guys are always anticipating the Diary of a Wimpy Kid ranking. And I finally worked up the time to be able to record this and do this for you guys. So I'm very, very excited. Reading the new book, Big Shot, did not take me very long. But finding a time to record this did take me a while. So I could have probably had this out a week ago. I really do apologize for that. I've been pretty busy. But make sure you stay tuned. There's a few videos that are going to be coming out, and then we're just going to kind of get back to our regular schedule. The month of October was just a crazy month of anticipation for big videos like this, so I hope that I paid it off pretty well for you guys, and now it's finally time to do pretty much the last video of all this hype, which is the Diary of a Wimpy Kid video, which I know you guys really, really do enjoy and you anticipate every year. We have two new books in this ranking this time. We have the new Diary of a Wimpy Kid Spooky Stories book, and then, of course, we have the Big Shot book. So let's get on to the ranking. Coming in last place, I can't believe we have 19 books to rank, but coming in the 19th spot is going to be Rowley Jefferson's Awesome Friendly Adventure. All the rest of the books in this series, I feel like, are at least a decent book, but this book is just a bad book, not even enjoyable. The way that this book is set up, specifically the plot, is really, really boring and drags the story. It goes with this cliche kind of Renaissance-like story where you have all these characters that don't really do anything. They're just there for Rowley Jefferson to talk about in the book. And Jeff Kinney likes to make the excuse that this is Rowley Jefferson's personality. He has a very running imagination, and this is how he would write his stories. But I don't think that's an excuse to make a really, really bad book with a really boring plot in which all you do is you tell the story and then you go back to real life when we have the same thing happen over and over again. It's just a continuous cycle of telling the story and going back to the real life plot. And the real life plot is basically Rowley and Greg fighting over what they're going to do with this new story, how they're going to distribute it. Basically, Greg wants to get a lot of money off of this story by selling action figures and posters and all this memorabilia so that they can make as much money off of this book as possible. Rowley doesn't like that because, you know, Rowley. And that's just, that's it for this book. It's the continuous cycle of furthering the story and going back to Greg and Rowley fighting with each other. And it's extremely, extremely boring. I don't think there's much more to say about this book. Let's get on to the next spot. Coming in at the number 18 spot is going to be Diary of an Awesome Friendly Kid. This book is only better than the Awesome Friendly Adventure because I thought that the stories, because this book is divided into many anecdotes for Rowley Jefferson's life, I thought they were definitely a lot more interesting than Rowley Jefferson's Awesome Friendly Adventure. And it wasn't this continuous cycle of doing the same thing over and over again. We had a series of stories throughout the entire book, so I thought it wasn't as boring, although I don't think the stories are that fascinating, and it falls into the same problem as Diary of an Awesome Friendly Adventure, where you make these really, really stupid and lackadaisical stories, and Jeff Kinney likes to make the excuse that this is just how Rowley Jefferson is. But it's just not a good excuse. If you want to make a spin-off series, I get Rowley Jefferson has a different personality from Greg Heffley, but at least make the stories interesting and make me want to continue reading the book, not make me want to drop the book and go do something else. So Diary of an Awesome Friendly Kid goes at number 18. At number 17, we have knocked out all of the Diary of an Awesome Friendly Kid books already. They're just not good. So at number 17 is Rowley Jefferson's Awesome Friendly Spooky Stories. I thought this was the best out of this spin-off series, and it really only comes down to, I think that the stories in the spooky stories were just better than in the Diary of an Awesome Friendly Kid. That's really the only difference. Everything else is pretty much the same, falls under the same problems that I already discussed with the Rowley Jefferson journals. I don't think there's much more to say. I just think that the spooky stories in this book were a little bit more interesting than in the previous Diary of an Awesome Friendly Kid entry. Let's get on to the next book. And number 16 is going to be Hard Luck, and most of the time I had The Ugly Truth at the bottom of the Diary of a Wimpy Kid book series. So the rest of this book series is going to be the Diary of a Wimpy Kid book series. And at the bottom of the series, personally for me, is Hard Luck. I don't think Hard Luck has a lot going for it. It feels similar to the Diary of an Awesome Friendly Kid book series in a sense that it has a lot of anecdotes and whatnot that are in this book, but they don't really do much for the book. They can keep you reading the book, but they're not as... This book isn't as... It doesn't keep you on your feet as much as books further on in this list do. So although I think Hard Luck was an enjoyable book, I enjoyed the anecdotes certainly much more than in the Awesome Friendly Adventures, whatever you want to call them. Hard Luck just doesn't really have a lot going for it and pales in comparison to entries coming in further in this list. So let's get on to the next spot. And number 15 is going to be The Ugly Truth, which I only have a paperback copy for it. I'm so used to having the hardback copies, and I only have 2 books that are in the paper copy. But anyways, The Ugly Truth, I think, has a little bit more of an interesting plot or concept behind it than Hard Luck, because it isn't just a series of anecdotes that go throughout it. It's kind of Greg realizing that he's growing up and he has to get used to, the effects of growing up when you get older, puberty, other stuff like that. You know what I'm talking about. But once again, I think this book just pales in comparison to books before it. And I can't really remember a whole lot about this book. It's been a pretty long time since I've read The Ugly Truth. So unfortunately, some of these entries that are earlier on in the series, I don't have a lot of memory of it. But from what I can remember, The Ugly Truth definitely pales in comparison to books that are further on in this list. So at number 15, The Ugly Truth. Number 14 is going to be Double Down, which I think this book is good at some spots and not as good at other spots. Once again, my memory is pretty faded of this book, but I do know that I enjoyed it obviously more than The Ugly Truth and Hard Luck. But Double Down, once again, just pales in comparison to books before it. I think it is another book where you just have a lot of anecdotes rather than just a main story that we follow along. And books like that in the Diary of a Wimpy Kid book series, I just don't think to tend as work as well, because they don't keep you as on your feet as much, because it's just a cycle of telling a bunch of anecdotes. And then at the ending of the story, you kind of combined everything that the story has told you for one big ending that pertains to everything that happened before it. So I think the ending of this book was kind of the best part of this book, not in a sense that I was hoping that this book would just finally end when I was reading it, but when they start to get to the filming aspect of it and whatnot, I think that's when the book kind of gotten interesting, which was the last maybe 20, 30 pages, can't really remember. But Double Down, it's a decent book. There are just books that are way better than it. Next up is Cabin Fever, which is better than the books that come before it, mainly because instead of telling anecdotes throughout the entire book, this book actually does follow along one plot that will keep you on your feet throughout the book, which I do like that plot a lot better than, how the Diary of an Awesome Friendly journals do it and whatnot. So Cabin Fever, I don't think it had the best plot for having this kind of formula that the Diary of a Wimpy Kid books like to do. Him staying or being locked in a house or in a cabin for around the Christmas season. I think it is an interesting concept. But once you see the other wacky and kooky concepts further on in this list, you'll see that this one is just not as good as those. So unfortunately, Cabin Fever, it goes at the number, I believe this is the 13th spot. If I am wrong, I will correct myself. But anyways, Cabin Fever. I was correct. And at number 12 is going to be Old School, which just comes before Cabin Fever for one main reason. I thought that the plot concept was more interesting than Cabin Fever. You know, electronics being shut down and the kids having to cope with this and do what they can to kind of entertain themselves, I think is a really interesting concept. And when this book was made, it certainly worked really well because it was around that time where kids really started getting onto their phones. I remember when I was littler, you to get a phone, you were probably about 13 or 14 years old. Now kids are really getting their phones really early. They're on their electronics quite a bit. So I like how this relates quite well to modern day. A lot of the other books in the Diary of a Wimpy Kid book series don't like to do that just because of Greg Heffley's personality. But this one can certainly relate to a lot of Gen Z kids a lot more because of the concept behind it. So I think it is an interesting concept, but there are other books out there that just do it a lot better. And you're going to hear me say that a lot in this list. So Old School goes at number 12. At number 11, the new kid on the block is going to be Big Shot, which I certainly was very satisfied with it. And my fresh reaction to this book was, it kept me on my feet throughout the book. And I'm glad that Jeff Kinney took a break from his formula that he has been doing for the last few books and did something different. He went back to kind of his original formula of doing a very basic concept that works really well. So I like that Big Shot steps away from the formula of this really kooky, crazy idea that's really trying to keep you on your toes. Big Shot doesn't try to go really far, doesn't try to go above and beyond, but it works really well. And I think the concept of Greg Heffley getting into sports, something that he certainly does not like, is a really good idea for the book. Once again, pales in comparison to books before it, but I'm happy that Jeff Kinney stepped away from the formula that he's been using for the last 3 or 4 books and did something different. So I definitely, if he would have stuck with the same formula, I probably wouldn't be as satisfied. But Big Shot, definitely a decent book. I think kind of in the middle of this list, honestly. Number 11, so kind of in the middle there. But Big Shot goes at number 11. At number 10, The Third Wheel, which is just, I think it's the quintessential Diary of a Wimpy Kid book. It is just your very typical Diary of a Wimpy Kid book that I think has a slightly more interesting concept than Big Shot that works really well. It kind of combines little anecdotes at the beginning of the book with the concept behind it, which is Greg, trying to get into the Valentine's dance with somebody and whatnot, which I think is a really good concept for a Diary of a Wimpy Kid book. So it's just your very typical Diary of a Wimpy Kid book that I certainly enjoyed. I do have a lot of memories of this book that I really enjoyed. It's just your very typical Diary of a Wimpy Kid book. There's not really much more to say. The Third Wheel, definitely very enjoyable. At number 9 is The Long Haul, which is funny because Long Haul was number 9. And this was the first book where we started to get into the formula of bringing all the characters together, like the main characters of Greg Heffley's family, to make one action-pumped Diary of a Wimpy Kid book that keeps you on your toes. Now, given there are books who are using this formula later on in the series that do it a lot better than The Long Haul, this was the first book to kick it off, and it certainly did it very well and a lot better than the movie that they tried to make for this book. So The Long Haul is very enjoyable, and it was the first time that we got this different formula in the Diary of a Wimpy Kid book series, and I think that's one of the main reasons why it's a little bit higher on this list, is because it finally decided to do something different for the last 8 books, and it certainly did it well. The idea of them going on this long road trip that isn't very successful definitely works a lot better in book form than it does in a movie form, although there were some things that they could have done in the movie that certainly could have made Diary of a Wimpy Kid The Long Haul, the movie, a lot better. It definitely works. A lot of these more crazy, over-the-top Diary of a Wimpy Kid books definitely work a lot more in book form. And I love it because it just keeps you on your toes the entire time. But unfortunately, there are books that do it a lot better, which I've said how many times in this ranking, but the long haul, it goes at number 9. Number 8, this is certainly going to be breaking tradition, and those of you who've been watching the last, 4 Diary of a Wimpy Kid rankings that I've made know that Dog Days has always stayed at the number 1 spot in my list, but this time around, it has dropped significantly, going at the number 8 spot. And it only comes down to the fact that I misinterpreted this book. I thought originally that this book was essentially The Last Straw, and The Last Straw was Dog Days, in a sense that the movie version of Dog Days combines The Last Straw and Dog Days. And the part that I liked about the movie was the Last Straw aspect, which was the conflicting relationship between Greg Heffley and his dad, which I enjoy a lot better than the whole summer vacation aspect that just adds a little bit more to it. So, overall, I still think Dog Days is a really good book, although I think Last Straw is better just because of the fact that I, for the longest time, misinterpreted that book. But Dog Days is still a really enjoyable book. It goes away from the traditional school setting, and we go into the summertime where we get a lot of good moments between Greg Heffley, Rowley. You know, they're hanging out with each other. A lot of different summer stuff that we are not used to because it's always in the school time. So Dog Days, very enjoyable book, although for the longest time. Number 7 is The Getaway, which is another book that tries to go really through the roof, brings all the whole Greg Heffley family together to give us this really action-pumped book where everything is going wrong on their family vacation during Christmas. And despite them going over the top, the book still works really, really well. I just think that other books that have the same basic formula, which I already talked about, do it a little bit better. And I think it's mainly because they don't try to go too over the top. The Getaway, I think, tries to go a little bit too over the top, but still works really well and is still a very enjoyable book. So, The Getaway, number 7. And number 6 is The Wrecking Ball, which I think finds the correct balance between going a little bit over the top with the Greg Heffley family, but also, you know, still having that traditional formula with the Diary of a Wimpy Kid books, adding in a few anecdotes here and there. So The Wrecking Ball, I think has that perfect balance, although I think The Deep End, despite not having the perfect balance, I still think is a lot more enjoyable than The Wrecking Ball. But The Wrecking Ball certainly gets really, really good towards the ending of the book. I couldn't wait to finish this book. Once I got towards the ending, I just kept reading page per page. I couldn't get my eyes off this book. So very, very enjoyable book. And the second book in the series where I actually have a paper copy, and this is because I pre-ordered it from the school library and got it handed to me. So The Wrecking Ball finds a very nice balance and still manages to be very, very enjoyable. So The Wrecking Ball, number 6. And number 5 is going to be The Deep End, which I think that The Deep End is basically the Long Haul 2.0. They go on this camping trip in an RV that doesn't obviously go as planned. And I think it's a lot better than the Long Haul because it combines a lot of different things. It combines that, you know, they're going on a long road trip in an RV. Things aren't going too well because they're trying to just go camping and relax. There's a lot of different things that they combine rather than just sticking with one simple thing, which is just a long road trip. They don't do that with The Deep End as they did in the Long Haul. So I think that's the main reason that The Deep End is better than the Long Haul and also books before it, because it doesn't try to go too over the top like in The Getaway. It finds a good balance just as Wrecking Ball. I just think it's a little bit more enjoyable because they do go a little bit over the top, bringing the whole family together, which is something they didn't do as much in the Wrecking Ball. So The Deep End goes at number 5. And number 4 is going to be The Meltdown, which out of all of the over-the-top books, I think The Meltdown is the best. This book keeps you on your toes the entire time. Very, very enjoyable. The idea of Greg Heffley's town having a huge snowball fight and they're battling to the death is really, really silly concept, but works so well and is really, really enjoyable. It cuts away from, you know, conflict happening in school, and it focuses on the town and them having huge snowball fights because snow days are happening in school and whatnot because there's too much snow. This book is really, really wild, really over the top, but that's what I love about this book. For being extremely over the top, like The Getaway, I think this book, it just works despite being really over the top. Very, very enjoyable. The Meltdown, probably one of the most rereadable books in the series, honestly, just because of how wild it is. I love it. Very, very action pumped. The Meltdown goes at number 4. You know what I love even more than the over-the-top Diary of a Wimpy Kid books? The original basic formula of the first 3 Diary of a Wimpy Kid books. And at the number 3 spot is going to be Roderick Rules. And unlike the other later entries in the Diary of a Wimpy Kid book series where they try to go really over the top, the first few entries focused a lot on the conflict between Greg Heffley and specific people in his family. And in Roderick Rules, they do it with the relationship with him and his brother. And it works really well throughout the book. It's really fun to see how they fight each other and whatnot, but you also get to see them create a unique bond in the book that only stays present in this book because, you know, Diary of a Wimpy Kid is kind of like a cartoon, you know. He doesn't really, Greg Heffley doesn't get a lot of character development through the series. He only gets it throughout the individual books. And in Roderick Rules, we see that, and it's just really satisfying, more satisfying than being thrilled throughout the over-the-top Diary of a Wimpy Kid books. So, Roderick Rules, arguably one of the best movies, not the best book, but still definitely at the top of my list and definitely deserves the 3rd spot. Number 2 is The Last Straw, which is kind of replacing Dog Days in a sense that obviously I misinterpreted. And The Last Straw, we get the conflicting relationship between Greg Heffley and his father, which I think is a little bit more interesting than in his relationship between him and his brother. So that's the main reason why The Last Straw is a little bit better. Everything else is pretty much the same as Roderick Rules. I think this book takes place in the summertime as well, so that's another bonus about this book over Roderick Rules. So The Last Straw goes at number 2. And number 1, I'm sure you've already guessed it by process of elimination, is going to be the original Diary of a Wimpy Kid, which is at the number 1 spot in this list for the main reasons why I put Halloween, the 1978 original, at the top of the Halloween list. This book doesn't try to go over the top. It doesn't try to astound you, keep you thrilled. It's just a unique book. Jeff Kinney didn't know how successful this book was going to be, but he certainly was very, very successful in this unique new book that has never really happened in literature before. Combining a cartoon diary of this kid who's basically talking about his middle school experience in this book, which he does not enjoy because he's really wimpy. He's kind of antisocial. He has a few friends, but for the most part, he doesn't really like anybody who's not like him. And this book is perfect at describing the character of Greg Heffley. Just this arrogant, stubborn character of Greg Heffley who never really changes. He always stays the same. And literature for the longest time doesn't like that. They like to have character development. But when you put it in a cartoon form, it works really well. And we just enjoy the wimpy middle school Greg Heffley in this book, despite him not really having much character development. He does have a little bit of character development, especially in the movie and in the book, with his relationship between him and his best friend, Rowley. But for the most part, we get to see how that shows, especially when the conflict the conflict at its high between Rowley and Greg in this book. So the original Diary of a Wimpy Kid book, it goes at the number 1 spot. Alright, so finally the anticipation is over. I got done with the Diary of a Wimpy Kid book ranking for the year. Now we just have to wait a whole nother year to do this again, which I know you guys will be hyped up for once the new Diary of a Wimpy Kid book comes out next year. So make sure you tell me your ranking in the comment section down below. I would like to see some of your guys' different rankings, different opinions in the comment section down below. Other than that, make sure you read the community post so that you can stay updated with any potential future content. And join the Discord. There's a lot of interesting, fun stuff or exclusive stuff that you don't get to see in the community posts sometime. So join the Discord. The link will always be in the description of every video. Other than that, like and subscribe, guys. And I'll see you next time.